My name is Lila Ward. I'm 32 years old. I still remember the way their faces drained of color, my dad's jaw tightening, my mom's hands freezing in mid-smile, right after the judge laughed at the letter I handed him. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was soft, almost surprised. The sound a man makes when the truth is so different from what he expected that he can't help himself. He leaned in, lowered his voice just enough that only the microphones in the first row could hear, and said, "Well, this is interesting." In that moment, something I thought the Navy had already given me finally clicked into place. Vindication. The kind that hits you right in the chest. The kind that makes every sleepless night, every doubt, every lonely mile driven down Highway 1 finally mean something. But before that moment, before the judge's laugh, before my parents' stunned silence, there was everything that led me there. And it started with a phone call I wish I'd never had to receive. 3 months earlier, I'd just come off deployment. I'm a logistics officer in the United States Navy. Spreadsheets and supply chains, not exactly glamorous, but critical. I'd barely made it through the front door of my tiny on-base apartment when my phone rang. "Lila," my father's voice said, too flat, too controlled. "Your grandmother passed away." For a second, the words didn't make sense, like he'd switched languages mid-sentence. Grandma Rosalind wasn't just my grandmother. She was the woman who raised me when my parents couldn't be bothered, the woman who made sure I had shoes that fit, lunches packed, someone in the bleachers clapping when I got an award at school. When other kids drew pictures of home, I drew her front porch. "She had a stroke," Dad added. "It was quick." I sank onto the edge of my bed. "When's the funeral? What can I do?" "We're handling everything," he said. "No need for you to get involved." My mom's voice floated faintly in the background. "You're too busy with your Navy life anyway." That should have been a hint. But grief fogs your judgment. I let it go, at least for the moment. When I drove down to the Keys a few days later, the air felt thick, heavy with salt, and something else. A hollow quiet I'd never felt there before. Grandma's house still smelled like citrus cleaner and lavender soap, like it always had. Her shoes were lined up by the door. Her mug was still in the sink. I spent that first week avoiding my parents as much as possible. Instead, I visited her favorite places, the little church on the corner where she burned her casseroles for potlucks, the bakery where she bought key lime pie on Fridays, the dock behind her house where she'd sit every evening with sweet tea and watch the sun make promises it would keep again tomorrow. People hugged me, cried with me, told me how much she meant to them. Shop owners, church friends, old Navy veterans who'd rented her cottages year after year. And of course, there were the cottages. 7 small vacation homes scattered across the Florida Keys. They weren't fancy, but they were charming. Little pastel-colored places with tin roofs and hammocks out front, each with its own quirks. Cottage 2, with the crooked step that Grandpa never fixed. Cottage 5, with the bougainvillea that tried to swallow the porch every summer. I grew up sweeping those porches, trimming those bushes, repainting shutters in the heat of June while Grandma handed me iced tea and said, "These houses will take care of you someday, sweetheart. You just have to take care of them first." When I heard she was gone, after the initial punch of loss, my next thought was of those cottages. Not because of the money, but because they were hers. They held her laughter, her recipes taped inside kitchen cabinets, her sharp handwriting on every shelf that said, "Don't forget to dust." 3 days after the funeral, I drove to my parents' house expecting something. A conversation about the estate, about the cottages, about how we'd keep her legacy going. They were sitting at the dining table when I walked in, back straight, a stack of folders between them like a wall. My dad cleared his throat. "We've decided to assume full ownership of the properties." I blinked. "Full ownership? Grandma always told me—" "She told you nothing," my mother cut in sharply. "You were a child." My jaw clenched. "She said there was a will." They exchanged a look that made my stomach twist. One of those silent marital conversations that says more than words ever could. "There is no will," my dad said, each word clipped. "The properties automatically transfer to us. It's the law. And frankly, after everything we've done for those houses, we deserve them." I almost laughed. They had done nothing. Grandma had maintained them herself for decades. I'd helped every summer and every holiday. My parents had barely lifted a finger. I tried to stay calm. Navy training teaches you that anger clouds judgment. "Can I at least see the paperwork?" My mother stood abruptly, gathering the folders into her arms. "There's nothing for you to read." She pressed the stack to her chest like I might grab it. Then she added with a little twist of her mouth, You should be grateful we're not asking you to reimburse us for the funeral. That one stung. I walked out of their house that night with a pit in my stomach. Something wasn't right. Something was missing. And most of all, where was Grandma's will? She was a planner, a list maker, the kind of woman who labeled the back of every photo with who was in it and where it was taken. She would not have left something this important to chance. A week later, I got my answer, or at least the first piece of it. One of Grandma's long-term tenants, a woman who'd been renting Cottage 3 for almost a decade, caught me as I was locking up. Her hands trembled as she pressed a plain envelope into mine. She told me to give you this, the woman whispered. Said it was important. Inside was a short note in Grandma's handwriting. If anything ever happens to me, look in the safe. You'll know what to do. A safe she'd never mentioned. After some pushing with the local bank and proving my identity 3 different ways, I found it. A safe deposit box under her name. Inside were binders filled with property records, old ledgers, deposits, receipts, tenant agreements, and an unsigned copy of a will. In it, she listed me as the person she wanted to maintain the cottages. She'd written that rents should stay affordable, that long-term tenants should be protected, that the cottages should never be turned into luxury commodities for whoever could pay the most. Unsigned meant not valid, not in court. But it was a trail, a starting point, proof of what she intended. I sat in the tiny bank vault chair with that unsigned will in my hands and felt something settle in my chest. They might have the folders, the keys, and the temporary power. But I had something stronger. I had her voice on paper, and I wasn't about to let it be erased. The morning after I found the unsigned will, I stood in my grandmother's kitchen staring at the fridge she'd owned since the late 90s. It still hummed like a stubborn old engine, still covered in magnets from all 50 states, some faded, some crooked, all part of her story. One of them, a little pelican magnet from Key Largo, tilted sideways like it was giving up. I reached up and straightened it. Everything looks better when it's lined up just right, sweetheart. Her voice slipped into my mind so clearly it felt like she was right behind me. But nothing in my life was lined up anymore. I left the house and drove to the cottages, needing air, needing solid ground under my feet. The sun hung low over the water, shimmering like hammered gold, the kind of morning she would have loved. She always said the keys stayed steady, even when the world didn't. But the keys didn't feel steady now, not with my parents acting like the cottages were already theirs. As I walked the gravel pathway between the pastel homes, something caught my eye. New gutters on Cottage 1, a brand new AC unit on Cottage 4, a neat pile of lumber near Cottage 6. Things I'd never approved, things that cost money. Money my parents never spent on these houses before. My breath tightened. Were they already making changes? Preparing them for sale? Positioning themselves as owners before the hearing? Lieutenant Ward. I turned to see Frank, one of Grandma's long-term tenants, a retired Coast Guard man who always stood like someone still waiting for orders. He lifted a hand in greeting. "Afternoon," I said, climbing the steps to his porch. He studied my face for about 3 seconds, long enough for him to see the storm behind my eyes. "You all right?" he asked. "You look like someone stole your compass." I sat beside him on the top step. "Maybe they did," I said. He nodded like he already knew. "Your grandma told me more than she told most folks. She didn't trust your parents to handle these places. Said they understood money, not people." The words landed heavily, pressing right beneath my ribs. "Did she ever talk about signing a will?" I asked. He hesitated, not suspiciously, just searching his memory. "She said she had an appointment to make things official. Seemed relieved afterwards." Official, another breadcrumb. I thanked him and kept walking, my eyes scanning every cottage as if they might whisper secrets back. And then I saw something I absolutely did not expect. My father, standing in front of Cottage 7, talking to a man in a polo shirt with a clipboard, a real estate agent. As soon as Dad saw me, he stiffened. The agent followed his gaze, gave an awkward nod, and headed to his car. "What was that?" I asked, walking straight toward him. Dad barely blinked. "None of your business." My jaw tensed. "Are you listing the cottages?" "We're evaluating options," he said, brushing invisible dust off his hands. "These places need real management, Lila, not some Navy fantasy of yours." My voice dropped into a lower register, a tone I picked up somewhere between boot camp and deployment. "You're trying to sell them." He didn't deny it. "They're ours," he said flatly. "We can do what we want." "You're acting like Grandma didn't exist," I whispered. For half a second, something almost soft flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone. She didn't understand how much responsibility these places require, he snapped. She didn't know what she was asking. She knew exactly what she was asking, I said. She trusted me. Dad scoffed. She trusted you because she spoiled you. I almost laughed. Me? Spoiled? The Navy officer who raised herself from 14 onward? The girl who worked summers sanding shutters while he sat inside in air conditioning? But I didn't say that. There was no point. He turned away. Drop the hearing, Lila. It's embarrassing. Then he walked off. The smell of kicked-up dust lingered after his truck pulled away. I leaned against Cottage 7's railing, forcing my breath steady again. A storm was coming, and they were pretending they didn't feel the wind. I called Andrea the second I sat in my car. My attorney didn't waste time. They're preparing to liquidate, she said. We need to act fast. But without a signed will. You don't need the full will, Andrea said. You need proof there was one, and that it vanished under suspicious circumstances. Her voice sharpened. It happens more often than you'd think. Later that afternoon, I drove to the little church Grandma had attended every Sunday for 30 years. Pastor Jim, a gentleman with soft eyes, met me in his office. Your grandmother left something with me, he said, unlocking a drawer. He handed me a sealed envelope. She said it was just in case someone tried to rewrite her story. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten note, a copy of an earlier, partially signed will. A notarized letter stating her intent to leave me managerial rights over all 7 homes. A list of beneficiaries. But at the bottom, a photocopy of a notary logbook entry. Date, time, witness names, final will signing. My pulse thudded. This wasn't a maybe. This wasn't a dream. She had signed it. It existed. And someone made it disappear. Pastor Jim placed a steady hand on my shoulder. She trusted you, Lila, he said softly. You were always her compass. That night, I sat at Grandma's old kitchen table, spreading out every piece of evidence like puzzle parts. It wasn't just papers. It was intent, love, legacy. This wasn't about who owned the cottages. It was about who protected them and who would twist their meaning for personal gain. Tomorrow, I told myself, everything changes. I wasn't walking into this blind anymore. I had proof. I had purpose. And I had Grandma's voice guiding me forward. I woke before sunrise the next morning, not because of an alarm, but because something in me had shifted. Navy instincts, maybe. Or the quiet voice inside that said, today matters. Don't be late. The hearing was still days away, but the work that needed to happen before that was the real battle. By 9:00 a.m., I was at Andrea's office in Key Largo. She arrived carrying a legal pad and 2 coffees, her dark suit sharp, her expression sharper. You look ready to take on Congress, she said. Just my family, I replied. She gave a single, approving nod and spread the documents across her desk. The notary logbook photocopy, the pastor's envelope, the earlier will drafts, tenant letters. As she reviewed each page, her expression shifted from clinical to impressed to something close to fierce. Lila, she said finally, this is more than enough to raise serious questions. And questions like these, courts don't ignore them. She tapped the notary log copy. A signed will that vanished under suspicious circumstances? Witnesses? A notary entry? That's the kind of thing that stops property transfers cold. And what if my parents fight back? I asked. Her eyes softened with something that felt like respect. Oh, they will, and they'll fight dirty, because people always do when they feel a legacy slipping away. But you'll win by staying calm. Judges don't care about emotion. They care about documentation. Documentation. Truth. Grandma's voice on paper. I could do this. The next 48 hours were a blur of signatures, conversations, and small-town detective work. Mr. Rohr, the retired notary, signed his affidavit with trembling hands but steady eyes. She signed that will right at her kitchen table, he repeated for the 3rd time, clear as day. The 2 neighbors who witnessed the signing, Mrs. Alvarez and Mr. Jerome, recalled the date almost perfectly. Oh, yes, Mrs. Alvarez said. She'd baked blueberry muffins and said something like, this is the last big thing on my list. The pastor provided a letter confirming Grandma's worries and intentions. And every piece fit. Every page whispered the same truth. Someone had taken the signed will. Someone with direct access. Someone who benefited immediately. 2 days before the hearing, something unexpected happened. I was locking up Cottage 3 at dusk when headlights swept across the gravel. A truck pulled in fast, too fast, and stopped only feet from me. The door slammed. Kyle. My brother looked worse than usual. Hair unwashed, clothes wrinkled, hands shaking with some emotion he didn't have the vocabulary for. What are you doing, Lila? He demanded. Seriously, what is all this? I'm doing what Grandma wanted, I said, voice steady. He pointed a finger at me, jabbing the air. You're trying to take everything. Everything she worked for. No, I met his eyes. I'm trying to preserve it. You think you're better than us because you're Navy, he snarled. You think your uniform makes you right? I didn't flinch. No, I said, but lying makes you wrong. He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. His face crumpled, not fully broken, but cracked in a way that revealed fear, guilt, confusion. You're tearing this family apart, he whispered. It was already torn, I said. I'm just refusing to pretend anymore. He slammed his truck door and sped off, gravel skittering behind him. I stood in the dark, the humid night pressing against my skin, and felt something unexpected. Not anger, not triumph, just sadness. Sadness for the brother who used to carry me on his shoulders at the fair. Sadness for the boy lost beneath years of bad choices and worse influences. Sadness that he was caught in my parents' shadow instead of Grandma's light. I breathed in the salt air and whispered, I hope I'm doing this right. For the first time, I felt like maybe she heard me. The day of the hearing, I arrived early. Old habits die hard. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and cold air conditioning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, making the floors glow. A bailiff with a kind mustache nodded at me. Ma'am, he said respectfully. Wearing my service khakis wasn't required, but it reminded me who I was. Someone trained to face storms, not run from them. My parents were already inside. Dad sat rigid, legs crossed, chin lifted like he was posing for a portrait titled Unbothered Patriarch. Mom smoothed her skirt repeatedly, a sign she was unraveling inside but desperate not to show it. Kyle leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, jaw tight, foot tapping out an anxious rhythm. They didn't look at me. Andrea arrived just in time. Ready? As I'll ever be, court called to order. We stood as the judge entered, a silver-haired man with the weary patience of someone who had seen every flavor of family disaster imaginable. He scanned the docket. Today, the estate of Rosalind Ward. Allegations include disputed inheritance, possible destruction of legal documents, and unauthorized transfer of assets. My father perked up, ready to perform. We'll begin with the respondents, the judge said. Dad stood, smoothing his shirt with a theatrical confidence. Your Honor, the cottages belong to us, he said. There is no will. My daughter is simply trying to stir up trouble. She doesn't deserve a cent. My mother nodded, lips tight. The judge blinked once, slowly. I see. Thank you. Please sit. Then he turned to me. Ms. Ward, please step forward with the packet you submitted. My heartbeat thudded like boots on a parade deck. I handed him the envelope. He opened it, read the notary affidavit, read the witness statements, read the pastor's letter, read the photocopy of the notary logbook, read the earlier drafts of the will, read the correspondence. Then he stopped, eyebrows lifted, read one page again, and let out that quiet, surprised laugh, the one that would be burned into my memory forever. Well, he murmured, this is interesting. The courtroom froze. Dad's face drained of color. Mom's breath hitched. Kyle's foot stopped tapping. The judge leaned back. Based on this evidence, he said, there is strong indication a final will was signed, notarized, witnessed, and subsequently disappeared. This court views that as highly suspicious. My father swallowed hard. Therefore, effective immediately. All sales, transfers, or modifications to the 7 cottages are halted. Temporary managerial authority is granted to Ms. Ward pending further proceedings. Further investigation may be required regarding the missing will. Mom gasped. She's lying. The judge raised a hand. One more outburst and I will remove you from this courtroom. Andrea leaned toward me. This is the best outcome we could have hoped for today. But the judge wasn't finished. He removed his glasses and spoke softly, but firmly. Family disputes are painful, but attempting to override a legal document is unacceptable. I strongly recommend mediation before this escalates. My parents looked like statues cracked at the seams. The judge struck the gavel. Court adjourned, and I exhaled the deepest breath of my life. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was truth, a foundation, a turning point Grandma would have understood. 2 days after the hearing, mediation was scheduled. It didn't take place in a courtroom. There were no judges, no rows of benches, no audience. Just a plain beige conference room with buzzing fluorescent lights, a long wooden table, a stale carafe of coffee, and walls so forgettable they almost felt intentional. Funny how the conversations that reshape your family tree rarely happen in dramatic settings. Mom and Dad were already there when I walked in. Dad sat stiffly, his tie perfectly straight, jaw set like he was bracing for impact. Mom kept her eyes on a framed beach print on the wall, as if staring at a generic sunset could hide the storm behind her own eyes. Kyle didn't show up. No surprise. Andrea placed our thick folder on the table. Their attorney, a tired-looking man with thinning hair and an attitude that said, "I'd rather be at lunch," stacked his papers with mechanical precision. The mediator, a calm woman in her 50s, began with a quiet smile. "We're here to explore a path forward for the Ward estate." Dad cut her off immediately. "This is unnecessary. We didn't destroy anything. That notary must be confused." Andrea didn't flinch. "3 witnesses, 3 affidavits," she said coolly, "and a notary logbook that matches the date your wife filed her inheritance claim." Mom's face tightened, barely visible, but real. The mediator raised a hand. "Let's stay civil. Both sides will have the chance to speak." She turned to me. "Ms. Ward, you may begin." I swallowed, feeling the truth gather like calm water inside me. "My grandmother raised me," I said. "She trusted me. She wanted the cottages maintained, affordable, cared for, not flipped into rental machines. She told me this since I was a teenager." Mom let out a small, pained breath. Dad shook his head. "Those cottages were meant for the family, not some charity project." "They were meant for people," I corrected. "People who needed rest, stability, second chances. Grandma chose tenants, not customers." Their attorney cleared his throat. "Regardless of emotional claims, my clients..." Andrea slid a paper across the table. "The notary's affidavit and witnesses say otherwise." The mediator nodded slowly. "It's clear Rosalind intended for her granddaughter to maintain the properties. The question is, what outcome do you want, Lila?" For a moment, I didn't speak. I thought of Grandma's handwriting inside kitchen cabinets, the hammock swaying slightly in the breeze, the tenants who'd lived there for years, the laughter baked into those pastel walls. Then I looked at my parents, at the exhaustion beneath their anger, at the panic hiding in their rigidity, at the years of choices that led them here. Good ones, bad ones, bad says, selfish ones. "I want the cottages preserved exactly as Grandma intended," I said. "Affordable, stable, no sudden rent hikes, no sales." Dad's brows drew together. "So we get nothing?" "No," I said softly, "not nothing." Mom blinked. "A small monthly stipend," I said, "funded from rental income. Enough to help you stay afloat. But no selling the cottages, no flipping them, no side deals. I take full legal managerial authority." Andrea raised an eyebrow at me, surprised but impressed. Mom's voice cracked. "After everything, you'd still help us?" "I'm Navy," I said. "I don't abandon my people, even when they abandon me." The mediator's pen paused. "This is remarkably fair." Dad looked away. The pride he'd polished like armor all these years cracked, just slightly. "What about Kyle?" he muttered. I exhaled. "Getting him treatment? Support? Sure. But the cottages aren't his piggy bank." Dad nodded, jaw tight, the closest he'd ever come to gratitude. Mom wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "We weren't fair to you." Dad's voice was rough. "I knew she trusted you. I should have too." Their attorney scribbled rapidly. The mediator smiled gently. "I think we have a resolution." Papers were signed, hands were shaken. A fragile truce settled over the room like dust after a hurricane. The next morning, I woke before sunrise again. But this time, the heaviness was gone. I padded into Grandma's kitchen barefoot, poured coffee into her chipped pelican mug, and stepped onto the porch. The keys were glowing. Cottages painted in soft pastels, tin roofs catching the early light, porch swings creaking gently in the breeze. Tenants waved. Frank watered his tomatoes. A young veteran stretched on Cottage 3's steps. This was what Grandma built. Not wealth, not prestige, not titles. Community, dignity, home. I walked the porches slowly, checking gutters, sweeping stray leaves, pausing to tighten a loose shutter. Little things. Important things. This wasn't a burden, it was purpose. Around mid-morning, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Mom and Dad stood at the base of the steps. Smaller somehow. Softer. "Morning," I said. Mom clasped her hands. "We didn't want to interrupt," she whispered. "You're not." Dad cleared his throat. "These look good," he said, gesturing at the freshly painted railing. "Thanks," I said simply. Silence stretched until Mom finally spoke. "Thank you for not ruining us." I leaned against the post. "I never wanted to ruin anyone. I just wanted Grandma's wishes honored." Dad nodded slowly. "She trusted you. I should have too." Mom added quietly, If you ever need help, we'd like to come by, volunteer, or just do something right for once." A small smile tugged at my lips. You're welcome here. Just remember, these cottages aren't for sale. Not ever. They nodded. A promise, not a surrender. As they walked away hand in hand, something inside me, something knotted for years, loosened. Not fully, but enough. Later that afternoon, I found Kyle sitting at the dock, feet dangling over the water. The boy who taught me to fish. The man who got lost somewhere along the way. I sat beside him. He didn't look at me when he said, I'm checking into a program, a real one. I swallowed. That's good, Kyle. I messed up. Yeah, I said softly, but you can still fix it. He sniffed. You're too good, Lila. I shook my head. No, just stubborn. We sat in silence, watching the sun dance on the bay. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe, my family wasn't broken beyond repair. Weeks passed. The cottages flourished. I hired help, restored gardens, repainted shutters, set rent agreements that protected long-timers. Every night, I wrote in a journal, copying Grandma's words. Protect them, and be wary of those who want what they did not earn. And below it, in my handwriting, forgive when possible, heal when you can, lead with integrity. One evening, as the sky turned gold and pink, I stood on the porch and whispered, I hope this makes you proud. And for the first time since she passed, I felt her answer, not in words, but in peace.